We have been fiscally unresponsible for many years in Democrat as well as Republican administrations, as well as Democrat and Republican controls of Congress. So we just have to stop spending money, and I appreciate Mr. Farr, and I would be glad to yield to you, sir.
Thank you for yielding. I just want to point out, you use the term nanny state. I don't think anybody wants to be a sense where government is responsible for everybody to raise the whole society. But I do think that this help that you give people from the federal government and from local and state governments is absolutely essential. I'll tell you, when you don't have that infrastructure of social services and social needs there, I'll tell you what happens. People still have those problems, only they don't have a place to go get them. So you know what they do? They knock on your door. And in America, we don't have to open our door day after day with somebody holding a baby, as I saw in the Peace Corps, people all the time with dead babies, infants, begging for money to bury them properly, or people asking you for extra food after you finish your meal. They know what time you eat, and saying, could you give your leftovers to us? We don't have that in America because we have an infrastructure that takes care of people. And I think if you totally wipe that out and say, well, leave it to charity, charity just is, you know, it's voluntary. It doesn't always work. When the markets crash, the charity isn't there, the poverty's still there, the need's still there. You see it as a doctor. And you know you've serviced people that couldn't pay their bills. But if you do have Medicare reimbursements and other kinds of Medicare reimbursements, so you can, even if they can't pay their bills, get some way of paying. If it was all left up to voluntary, the doctors would have to serve people that just have no money. I don't think all the poor people in America would be taken care of. So, you know, we do have to concern ourselves about how much care and spending we do. But at the same time, don't wipe out the programs that are essentially the life support systems of a society that is rich as America, that we can afford to take care of the people most vulnerable, whether they're aging or infants. And I think a lot of the discussion here has been about trying to delete the programs that help people at their most vulnerable stage of life.
I appreciate your comments. But you see, when I was sworn in the Marine Corps, when I was sworn into Congress now 3 times, I swore to uphold the Constitution. And I believe in this document as our Founding Fathers meant it, which means very limited government. And in fact, we're destroying the very thing that has made this country so great, so powerful, so rich as a nation. And that's constitutional limited government, the free enterprise system, private property rights, personal responsibility, rule of law, and morality. And it's absolutely critical, if we're going to have a bright, shining star of liberty over the heads of America, that we rebuild those foundational principles. And that's what I'm fighting for. We'll continue to do. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman from Georgia has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to rise in opposition to a previous amendment, the Gosar amendment, to eliminate the Food for Peace program and transfer it to rural development. But I was going to rise in opposition to the gentleman from Georgia's amendment, which also goes after Food for Peace. And I'm glad he's withdrawing it. But I find it astonishing that there are so many on the other side that are attacking programs that I think are so vital to our national security. But Mr. Gosar's amendment would tell farmers that we will take away from them $1 billion in U.S. purchases of their crops so that we can borrow money in the form of loans for other purposes. That's essentially what he's proposing. Does that make sense to anyone? So we tell U.S. farmers who have been selling wheat, rice, soybeans, vegetable oil, beans, peas, lentils, and other commodities to the U.S. government that this market is closed to them. So long, goodbye, go borrow money, go into debt, take out a loan to develop the rural economy. Now, Mr. Chairman, I support the Rural Development Program, and I obviously support the Food for Peace program. Both of them directly benefit American farmers. Mr. Gosar himself said Food for Peace, Title II, PL 480, merits support. Well, let's talk about why. It supports U.S. farmers, millers, freight rail, truck, and shipping. Food aid provided by USAID is a life-saving measure for 11 to 16 million vulnerable people overseas. Our largest emergency food aid program, including Darfur in southern Sudan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Haiti, and Ethiopia. U.S. food aid not only helps people survive, it supports U.S. national security interests. It promotes stability and goodwill, especially in Libya, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. Our emergency and humanitarian food aid sends the clear message to desperate people in need that the American people care. The Gosar Amendment sends the opposite message, that the American people don't care at all. Go ahead and starve. We need to support Food for Peace. We need to oppose that amendment, but we also need to oppose amendments that gut essential food and nutrition programs for poor people, not only here in the United States, but around the world. You know, this notion that somehow that when we support programs like Food for Peace, that it's just helping a bunch of foreigners overseas is just wrong-headed. It is American farmers that produce much of the food that goes to support the hungry around the world. It is American farmers that are so important in our battle against terrorism, because quite frankly, I think these programs, as Secretary Gates has said, do more to enhance our national security than anything else. I urge my colleagues who are coming to the floor with amendments to gut these programs to stop it. Enough. These are essential programs. They help people who are helpless overseas, but they also support our economy here in the United States and help our U.S. farmers. With that, I yield back my time.
Seeks time. Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Kingston.
I rise in opposition to the amendment. I want to
Gentleman
make
recognized
2 points.
for 5 minutes.
Number one, we have actually reduced this account 31%. And again, as I've said many times, passing an appropriation bill that's building the card house, there's a delicate balance. I got my friend Mr. McGovern, who believes that we've cut too much, got my friend Dr. Brown, who believes we haven't cut enough, and so we're trying to move this legislation. And I wanted to talk a little bit about PL 480 and make a couple of things. Number one, there is a national security interest in it. This is not about international charity alone. We do have an interest. America needs to be engaged around the world. When there is a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, if we're not there, who will be there? And this is very important. And my friend Mr. Dix is here, former chairman of the HAC-D committee, and knows that in terms of the national defense, we have soldiers right now, as I speak, in 60 different countries around the globe. Now, they are engaged for a reason. It's not a job creation program. They're keeping an eye on national security interests. If you travel in China, or if you travel in Africa or travel in South America right now, you'll see a new player that was not there 10 years ago, and that is the country of China. China is not necessarily an immediate threat to us, but it is a concern to us. China is rising as a military force and certainly as an economic source, and they are engaged all over the globe. Often our international programs, including food programs, keeps us engaged and gives us an opportunity to have some doors open which we would not ordinarily have. America provides 57% of the food aid in the world, followed by the EU at 27% and Japan at 6%. Right now, China is not a major player. The oil-rich Middle East countries certainly aren't major players, but it is about engagement. And it's interesting that we have a balance between developmental aid and emergency aid, because if there is a Haitian disaster, we're the first on the ground trying to get food to the people. But we need to also be there with developmental aid to make sure that these countries aren't dependent, that these countries do know how to grow their own food and have their own resources. So I just want to emphasize again that this program has been trimmed already 31%, and it seems to be the balance that will get this bill over to the Senate so that we can negotiate further on it. We are in many, many different countries around the world. With that, I want to yield the balance of my time to Dr. Gosar.
Thank you, my gentleman friend. I'd like to reiterate that this is an issue that we also have to take care of folks at home. For example, I brought up the Navajo Nation and the Bennett Freeze area. This is a treaty responsibility of the United States in which we forbade different groups from even raising to take care of a window pane or create economic certainty. We have to take care of our own or we will not be able to help anybody across this world. And that's where I actually rise in support of my amendment.
And Mr. Chair, I yield back the balance of my time. I do want to point out some of the things that this program is doing in Pakistan, Haiti, the Sudan, and Afghanistan, and I will submit that for the record at the proper time. Thank you. Yield back.
The request of the gentleman from Georgia will be handled in general leave. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona? Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from Arizona.
Recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18 for the proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. Purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment I hope is at the desk at present, and it's being prepared.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia, page 49, line 23. After the dollar amount, insert reduced by $940,198,000. Page 80, line 2. After the dollar amount, insert increased by $940,198,000.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, as I spoke on the previous amendment, we just don't have the money. And it's very altruistic of my friends on both sides to want to feed people all over the world. And I very much would like to be able to do so, but we can't feed our people here at home. We've got a high jobless rate.
Mr. Chairman?
We have a
Mr. Chairman, we don't have a copy of the amendment. Point of order.
Gentleman from Washington.
We don't have a copy of this amendment.
Copies are at the desk. Gentleman from Georgia may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We just have to simply stop spending money that we don't have.
Where are we?
And this would just zero out the balance of the funds if my friend from Arizona's amendment is indeed passed into this bill. So, Mr. Chairman, as we look at where we're going as a nation, we've got to be focusing on jobs and the economy. We have to leave dollars in the hands of businesses, particularly small businesses. Leave the dollars in the hands of individuals so that they can take care of their own needs in their own communities instead of building a bigger and bigger federal program to try to take care of everybody's needs all over the world. We just simply do not have the money, and it just has to stop, and it's time to stop right now. We're headed towards an economic cliff in this nation, and it may be very soon where we're going to be off that cliff, where everybody in this country, except for the extremely wealthy, are going to be forced into just tremendous poverty. We have a potential of having riots in the streets and bloodletting in this country because of the great debt and spending that's going on. We're destroying jobs, we're destroying our economy, and it just must stop. The sooner the better. My amendment would simply zero out the rest of the funds in this program that I think it's critical for us just to stop spending money. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks time? Gentleman from California? Who seeks time?
Seek time in opposition.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Again, I don't know how many times we have to reiterate that these cuts, squeezes, and trims hurt the most vulnerable people in America and abroad. My good friend talked about a fiscal disaster that we are having in America, and then just goes amendment after amendment attacking the people that are most vulnerable. This one just wipes out the entire program. I wish the member had been here to watch what happened in the early part of this decade when a partnership with the rich was created in this Congress to help in every tax way possible, in every expenditure way possible, in building up the war machine to respond to Iraq and Afghanistan. The rich got richer. The corporations that build all the equipment for our men and women in uniform got a lot of profits. We did that by putting it all on the credit card of the American taxpayer. We just charged it up. Sir, yes, we ran up an incredible deficit. And You know, he fails to look at the other side of the coin. Talks about the fact he'd been in the Marine Corps. Marine Corps was also put on that tax credit card. The uniform, the free medical service he got, the food he ate while he was a Marine, all those things, thank God, we pay for. But then to say, okay, we're going to now reduce this fiscal disaster by just attacking the most vulnerable people in the world, wiping out the Food for Peace program, I'll tell you, this is just, I mean, where are we? Where is the image of America? Where is that heart and soul? Where is that feeling of people that love our country because the handouts that we do give at a time of need? We're there to respond to disasters. And we can't be just that responder that says, okay, we're going to respond with our war machine. We've got to all respond with our heart and our soul and a character of American human beings, which is very giving and very compassionate. To wipe out the Food for Peace program is not a wise thing to do.
Gentleman
Remainder
yields.
of my time.
Gentleman from Wisconsin, Washington State is recognized.
Yeah, it's going to stay up, Sam. I would just say to the chair and to the author of the amendment, who's a doctor, a medical doctor, remember the Hippocratic Oath: do no harm. This amendment, if it's enacted, will harm millions of people in the world. Millions of children will die because of this amendment. And I just think it's outrageous, and I hope that it'll be defeated.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yeah, I don't have the time.
From California.
The gentleman yield.
Gentleman from California controls the time.
I'll yield my time to Mr. Dix.
I don't think you can do that.
Yield it to you for a question.
No.
The gentleman from California controls the time.
How much time do I have left?
The gentleman has 1.5 minutes of his time.
Mr. Brown, I yield to you.
Thank you, Mr. Farr. I appreciate you yielding. And Mr. Dix, I resent the fact that you accuse me of wanting to do harm, because I do not.
You don't think your amendment will do harm, sir?
No, sir. Actually, it'll do good. The thing is, we come to the crux of the problem here, in that some people in this body believe that the federal government ought to take care of everybody in the world. And I'd love to be able to do that. There's no end of good things that can be done all over this world. But for you to accuse me of wanting to do harm to people, I resent that.
It's your amendment, sir. I didn't get up here and offer an amendment that would cut out funding.
Sir, I have the time. I do resent the fact that you accuse me of wanting to do harm. And, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if this comes to the point of order of taking down the gentleman's
Take my
words,
time back. He can
take his time back.
Chairman,
I bring forth a point of order.
I reclaim my time, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from California reclaiming his time.
And in finishing, I'd just like to say, you know, there is some inconsistency and insincerity here about stating what you did as a profession and then cutting these programs, because these go to the children that we think the medical profession so much appreciates trying to care for. I mean, if you can't feed children, if you can't feed women, and you can't feed infants, no matter where in the world they are, problems are going to occur, big, serious problems. That is not fiscal conservative. That is just not very intelligent.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Bring a point of order, Mr. Chairman.
From what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to bring a point of order about the gentleman's accusations that I want to do harm, and I believe this meets the criteria of taking down his words, and I'd like a ruling from the chair regarding that.
All members would suspend, and the chair would ask the clerk to transcribe the words.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Versus the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition.
I withdraw my point of order.
The demand is withdrawn. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I will revise my words and make sure that it is not anywhere close to being an insult to the gentleman. I appreciate him withdrawing his point of order.
Without objection, the gentleman from Washington may revise his remarks.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Does any member...
Yes. I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in very, very, very strong opposition to this amendment. Gutting the Food for Peace program. Food for Peace. You know, I find it somewhat ironic that we have people who oppose food for peace but support weapons for war without giving it a second thought. The fact of the matter is this amendment would do great harm to some of the most helpless people in the world. And I believe very, very strongly that I think on a bipartisan basis that this amendment should be defeated. The Food for Peace program has saved the lives of millions and millions of people. It is a good program. It is something we should be proud of in this country. And we are on a bipartisan basis, I believe. We are proud of the Food for Peace program. And I think we need a big bipartisan vote to defeat this amendment. I appreciated the chairman's remarks earlier, and I thank him for his comments on this issue. And I yield to the gentleman.
This program by 38% below the President's budget request and 31% below last year. I mean, that is a major cut in this program, and to go any further, I think, would be a big mistake. Thank you for yielding.
I thank the gentleman, and I would just say that yes, we need to get serious about the deficit, and we need to find ways to to bring this deficit down. But taking the food out of the mouths of children is not the way to do it. It's not the way we need to do. Not the way we do this. I mean, I can go through a litany of things that deserve to be cut, from some of the subsidies that we provide some of the big agricultural businesses, to the subsidization of the oil companies, to some of the tax breaks for the Donald Trumps of the world. I mean, I would rather start there. But to denigrate this program, I think is wrong. I mean, this is something we should be proud of, and in a bipartisan way, we should be proud of this. Presidents, Republican and Democratic presidents, have supported this program. And this is vital to the survival of so many people around the world. And again, I would reiterate what Secretary Gates said. These programs, these developmental programs, are important to our national security. I'm going to tell you, they do more to help improve our image and protect our security around the world than a lot of these other programs that we have that export military hardware all around the world. This is important. This is real. This saves lives. So I would urge my colleagues on a bipartisan basis to soundly reject this amendment and let us support Food for Peace. Let us support food programs for the poor. That's who we are. That reflects well on this country, and I urge my colleagues to defeat this amendment. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Missouri...
Strike the last word, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman is granted 5 minutes.
I have been sitting back listening to all of the discussion here on a subject that is near and dear to my heart, and it has been near and dear to our family since the very first time my late husband came back from Ethiopia, having sobbed as he told me a story about a child from Ethiopia who died in his arms. Now, I will say that there's been an awful lot of rhetoric on this, and I think that the chairman, in spite of the fact that I don't like the numbers that we've been given, the chairman, who also has traveled to Africa and has seen up close and personal how these programs really do make a difference for those of us who live here in the United States, how important these programs are for our national security, as Mr. McGovern said, and Mr. Dixon, and also how important it is that America, which is still the richest country in the world in spite of our financial difficulties, has respect and wants to help others because we ourselves have been so well blessed. So I rise in opposition to this amendment, and I want to thank my colleagues on the other side and thank Mr. Kingston as well, and hope that as we proceed through the process that we might be able to find some common ground, perhaps get a little bit more assistance for these vital programs, but let's try to keep our emotions down a little bit, because everybody feels very strongly, but yet our common goal is to lift this country up, and by helping others we do that. Yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there anyone seeking recognition? The question is on the amendment. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed? No. In opinion, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Request a recorded vote.
To Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman of Georgia will be postponed.
Anything else in this paragraph? Not in this one.
The clerk will read.
Page 50, line 1, Commodity Credit Corporation Export Loans, Credit Guarantee Program Account, including transfers of funds, $6,820,000. McGovern-Dole International Food for Education and Child Nutrition Program grants, $180 million.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to offer my amendment, which would zero out the McGovern-Dole program and save taxpayers $180 million in the coming fiscal year. We simply cannot continue to dole out money that we simply don't have, and particularly when we're experiencing such a huge economic crisis and economic emergency here at home. It's important to make serious cuts wherever and whenever we can, and this funding is not tied to a specific national security interest. So we can't afford to do without it. I think we should do without it. Thus, I'm offering my amendment, and I hope it passes. Now I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this is simply a bad amendment. It eliminates funding for one of the U.S. signature programs to reduce child hunger in the world. I helped establish the George McGovern-Robert Dole International Food for Education program, first as a pilot project in 2000 and then as a permanent program in the 2002 Farm Bill. It has always had strong bipartisan support, including my colleague and my friend Joanne Emerson, and then Congressman, now Senators John Thune and Jerry Moran. McGovern-Dole has one basic goal: provide at least one nutritious meal to some of the world's most vulnerable children in a school setting. It has reduced the incidence of hunger among school-aged children. It has increased school enrollments and attendance. It has increased the support of families and communities for education, especially for girls. McGovern-Dole is a proven success. Instead of cutting its funding, let alone eliminating it, we should be scaling it up. The cuts to McGovern-Dole already in the bill would end school meals for more than 400,000 children. Eliminating the funding would literally take the food out of the mouths of over 5 million of the world's most vulnerable children. Mr. Chairman, it's bad enough to ignore hungry children. It's even worse to give a hungry child a meal, to give their parents hope for a better future, and then take it away. These are not just numbers in a bill. These are real, living, breathing human beings, real children who are in school, many for the very first time, because the U.S. is working with local communities to advance education and nutrition. Now, I've visited some of these programs around the world. I respectfully suggest to those who want to eliminate them to first go and see with their own eyes what they are doing on the ground. Look at these children, their parents, their teachers, their community leaders in the eye, and make sure you want to tell them you don't care if they go hungry or get a chance to go to school. In Colombia, I visited a program in Soacha, on the outskirts of Bogota, on barren hillsides surrounded by shanties housing thousands of internally displaced families. Children were receiving school breakfast and lunch. Mothers and grandmothers were training as cooks, preparing the meals. Clearly visible in the cafeteria were USAID bags of grain, beans, and lentils. One mother came up to me and said, "Please thank the American people when you go back home. I couldn't feed my children. I couldn't send them to school. I was afraid my son, who was 11 years old, was going to join the paramilitaries or guerrillas just to get food. Now my son is getting fed and he's staying in school. Please tell the American people thank you." In Nairobi, Kenya, in the largest slum in the world, I went to a McGovern-Dole breakfast and lunch program. I was amazed by the students' energy and achievements. The school principal showed me how they store and prepare the U.S. commodities that feed her students, and how all the students know that this program is a program from the people of the United States of America. I ate a cereal mush made from yellow peas grown by American farmers in a room full of young children. The kids dug into this food like it was manna from heaven. One little boy would take a bite and then scoop a small amount out of his bowl and put it in his pockets. He was taking food home to his younger siblings, who don't get anything to eat at all. Outside of Nairobi in Maasai country, and a school for the girls where McGovern-Dole provides a hot lunch, I helped cook and serve the meal of U.S. bulgur wheat and locally grown vegetables. One student told me how grateful she was to go to school and eat every day. She grew up in a village over 100 miles away. When she was 12, her father told her that she had to marry a much older man. She refused. Her father ordered her to go to her uncle's house, get his machete, and bring it back to him. She knew that her father was going to kill her. She ran away, walking alone for days, because she had heard of this school. She was then 15, healthy, well-fed, and at the top of her class. I knew I was talking to someone who could be president someday. In the very best way, this young woman will never forget us. And in the very worst way, when we take food away from children, families, and schools, those communities will never forget us either. They won't forget that we took away their children's future. I wouldn't forget it if it were my child. Would you? Mr. Chairman, there are many ways to advance U.S. national security and economic interests abroad. Education and child nutrition are very much at the top of that list. It is important that we support the McGovern-Dole program. This has enjoyed incredible bipartisan support. And I want to tell you, this does more to enhance our national security than sending weapons to countries all over the world. The people who benefit from this program know it has come from the people of the United States of America. This is a good program. Support the McGovern-Dole program. Reject this amendment. I yield back my time.
For what reason does the gentlewoman from Missouri seek recognition?
Take the last word, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to take the entire 5 minutes. I do want to say a couple of things. Number one, I totally associate myself with the remarks of my colleague from Massachusetts, and it is quite true that taking away the program's funding would, in fact, literally take food out of the lives, or the mouths, excuse me, of 5 million hungry children. I also want to add, because I know that people probably don't understand this if you haven't been working with this program, is that countries actually graduate from this program. This is not an ongoing effort in every single country, whether Colombia might have graduated, Nicaragua, and other countries. But, you know, with so many threats against our nation, I just think it's important to share America's bounty with hungry children in other places and in critical places around the world so that we can help America feed their hungry bodies out of goodness. And it really is something that the entire Defense Department, you ask any Army officer, any member of the armed services, when they are in areas where these children's lives are being changed by a bowl of mush, as Mr. McGovern said, it makes a huge difference. It makes them able to go to school. It makes little girls have the only opportunity they will ever get for any kind of education, and it is absolutely ridiculous that people don't understand how important this is for the security of our country. And I yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
I just want to thank the gentlewoman for her comments and thank her for her leadership, not only on this issue but on so many other issues to help hungry children around the world. I just want to also commend her for making the point that the McGovern-Dole program, in the program there are provisions that require that countries graduate out of the program. So this is not a permanent U.S. handout, if you will. This is some support to help get established school feeding programs that will, one, get more kids in school, two, give kids a nutritious meal.
And then the country, and if I could claim back my time for a moment, the countries actually take this program over. This is a jump start, and one that, for no other reason, little girls would never go to school. And to me, it's just shocking, and we take these things for granted in this country. But it sets a very, very good example and gives these children and their families an opportunity to do more for themselves with just a wee bit of help from us. I yield back.
I also want to say that this is, this program is named after George McGovern and Robert Dole. So by the very naming of this program, it shows the bipartisanship that has been involved in forming this program from the very beginning. And I think we all should be proud of that in this Congress.
Well, and we should be. And Elizabeth Dole took over for Bob after he left the Senate, and this was a very important issue for her, but it has always been one that is bipartisan and one that helps lift other people up, because we really do have so much here. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I just want to make one short comment. What happens in this program is that we contract with countries to create these incentives to get kids to go to school. And you've heard the incredible stories Jim McGovern just gave us, Congressman McGovern, on his experiences in visiting these countries. It's not only that these contracts are made with the countries so that they have to put something into it, but they also have a way of working themselves out. So it's not one of those, going back to Congressman Brown's comment earlier about Nannygate, this is a work yourself out of a program. You can get off the program by having it work, and then you can move the monies to another country. So I think it's an outstanding program and worth keeping, and certainly this cut would ruin it all. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. What purpose is the gentlelady from Connecticut?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this short-sighted and I believe dangerous amendment, which will increase suffering and misery all around the world and put American men and women in danger. And my colleagues have addressed that issue as well. The appropriations legislation before us is already remarkably stingy with regards to international food aid. It cuts McGovern-Dole Food for Education program by 10% below the President's request, and Food for Peace by an astonishing $650 million. It's a 38% reduction. Now Mr. Brown proposes to zero out McGovern-Dole entirely. This is a program that, as you can tell by its name, has been a hallmark of bipartisan leadership for over a decade now. It is the linchpin in our diplomatic efforts in developing nations. Make no mistake, cutting McGovern-Dole endangers our national security. You zero out this program, as this amendment calls for, would needlessly put the safety and the security of American families at risk. For the first time in history, over 1 billion people, 1 in 6, are undernourished worldwide. Every 6 seconds a child dies because of hunger and related causes. This hunger forces people into desperate acts, dangerous pacts. Famine and starvation create the conditions for militant extremism, the very extremism our troops fight in Afghanistan and around the world. And so McGovern-Dole and the international food aid it provides is a crucial front in our efforts to combat global terror. We fight hunger and poverty, and we undercut the recruiting base of those who would threaten us. As former National Security Advisor Sandy Berger wrote in the Los Angeles Times, and I quote, "Ensuring that no child goes to school hungry is the single greatest investment we can make in building prosperous, healthy, and stable societies." McGovern-Dole is that investment, and it works. Operating in 28 countries around the world, including Afghanistan and Pakistan, McGovern-Dole provides at least one nutritious meal each day to vulnerable children in schools. It has shown demonstrated success in both reducing hunger and increasing school enrollment and attendance, especially, as my colleagues pointed out, for girls. Otherwise, little girls in these countries don't get any education and they don't get any food. Last month, the GAO released a report on McGovern-Dole, and it called for strengthening monitoring by the USDA, accelerating the time frame of reporting. It did not, however, call into question any of the objectives of the program. This program works. Since becoming a permanent program in the 2002 Farm Bill, it has reduced hunger and violence, increased education and nutrition, become a vital element in our international diplomacy. Zeroing out the program, as this amendment demands, would not only destroy all these many benefits for America and the developing world, it would mean 5 million kids will go hungry again. 5 million children. And yet, even as this amendment threatens to force millions in starvation, somehow the majority's budget still finds money for oil company subsidies and tax breaks for millionaires. Cutting this funding is short-sighted in the extreme. McGovern-Dole works. It works for America. It works for developing nations around the world. It moves children from starvation to education, and it undercuts the recruiting ability of those who would do America harm. I urge my colleagues, stand with our troops, stand against hunger worldwide, and oppose this disastrous amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Anyone else seeking recognition? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The gentleman from Georgia.
Question, recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia will be postponed. We'll read.
Page 50, line 1. Page 51, line 1. Title 6, Related Agencies and Food and Drug Administration. Department of Health and Human Services, Food and Drug Administration, Salaries and Expenses, $3,654,148,000.
What purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment we just read, and that's my amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Stearns of Florida. Page 51, line 18, insert after the dollar amount the following, reduced by $392 million. Page 52, line 11, insert after the dollar amount the following, reduced by $392 million. Page 54, line 6, insert after the dollar amount the following, reduced by $392 million. Page 80, line 2, insert after the dollar amount the following, increased by $392 million.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just briefly say this is a very simple amendment. It takes the Center for Tobacco Products back to the 2009 level. Now, all of you should realize this agency never existed in 2006. There has been prodigious increases in this center. So it's a very simple amendment. We're taking back the funding for this Center for Tobacco Products back to the 2009 level. Now, under the President's plan, the budget for the FDA Center for Tobacco Products has simply exploded. The administration's budget justification to Congress states, quote, FDA is experiencing an unprecedented and dramatic surge in staffing and facilities needs that will cause the FDA facility requirements to exceed the scope of the 2009 master plan. I understand that. The FDA is expanding, does good work. We're not criticizing it. But one area of the FDA's budget that is growing way too fast under this administration's budget is the brand new Center for Tobacco Products. Again, this agency, this center, did not exist in 2006. In the FY 2012 Agriculture Appropriation legislation reported by the committee, it continues the trend of major discretionary spending reductions sought by the Republican majority. This same fiscal restraint should be applied to the Center for Tobacco Products. We're talking about appropriation levels going back to 2006, 2009, 2010. So all I'm asking is let's move this back to 2009. An FY 2012 budget that was requested by the FDA's Tobacco Act was $454 million, an increase of $238 million from fiscal year 2010, enacted levels of $235. So think of that. In 1 year, it practically doubled. 110% increase. Now, this is when we have a deficit, $1.5 trillion every year, and we have a debt that's approaching $15 trillion. If we look at FY 2009 and $85 million funding, from the fiscal year 2009, there's been a 500% increase in this new Center for Tobacco Products. Tobacco regulation obviously is a new program at the FDA. They have been just chomping at the bit over there for the last 25 years to be involved with the regulation of cigarettes and everything like that. They want to regulate tobacco, and I think, frankly, you know, the House voted for it. I accept that, but we don't need to increase from 2009 up to what we're looking at, these large increases. We've got to return some of this increases to the debt and to the deficit. So a 500% increase in a budget is way too large. I suggest that funding should continue at the 2009 levels. Are you accepting my amendment? Oh, I'm reclaiming my time. We're rolling back funding for many other programs, and it's proper to ensure that FDA also bears some of the burden during this most austere budgetary times. Now, all of us know that smoking is bad, and the question is, what is the FDA doing it through this Center for Tobacco Products? It's not clear to me, but do they have to increase over the years almost 500%? Reducing their funding to fiscal year 2009 level will be a restraint and will give the authorizing committee a chance to review the FDA regulations and review how the FDA plans to implement the law. I simply want to ensure that the FDA does not overreach with their authority and ensure that it's using the best approach to ensure that tobacco harm is reduced. We all want to see it's reduced. But the question is, we all have to take a sacrifice. Doesn't the Center for Tobacco Products also have to contribute? There's no reason for it to have, over these years, since a 500% increase. And so, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a modest attempt to try and save money. It's quite a substantial amount of money for a good cause, which is reducing our deficit, our debt, in the long term. Let the FDA and this new Center for Tobacco Products move forward, but not at these chomping, prodigious, gargantuan increases because they felt that it's a catch-up time. I mean, every agency down here can come and say it's catch-up time. But obviously, under this economy and under this huge deficit, we cannot continue to look at agencies like this over this period of time getting a 500% increase in funding. So with that, I ask my colleagues to support my amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Rise in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, I hope that we don't have more of these ambush amendments that we haven't had a chance to really look at. And this one really has serious implications. What it seems that this amendment does is, first of all, reduce the tobacco industry's fees that they have to pay the federal government. This is a big help to the tobacco industry. Cuts fees that the private sector has to pay the federal government, and what do those fees go into campaigns to reduce tobacco consumption and to treat issues related to tobacco. That's the way the amendment reads to us. And I would just like to remind the author that I represent California. California has time after time put taxes on the ballot to increase tobacco taxes, and they have passed overwhelmingly. And we use those fees that would come from the industry, from the sale of, not even the industry, they come from the user, to run very effective anti-tobacco campaigns. We've reduced smoking in California almost to zero. I mean, it's incredible. Most cities in California don't allow any smoking in public places. The communities I represent along the coastline don't allow you to even smoke on the beaches. You certainly can't smoke in public buildings and in any other kind of, even in public places that are privately owned. So to do this, to ambush the anti-tobacco campaign with this amendment is just it's a giveaway to the tobacco companies, and reduces the fees they have to pay and hurts the ability to eliminate the illness caused by tobacco. And anybody who's had cancer in their family, as I've had, is very, very aware of the illnesses caused by tobacco users. I think this is a very dangerous amendment, and hopefully the gentleman will withdraw it. If not, we ought to oppose it.
Gentleman yields back. Anyone else seeking recognition? Seeing no one, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. Those in favor say aye. And those opposed would say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
I would like a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I'd like to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to introduce an amendment, but I just want to make a statement, and I'll withhold the amendment. And the statement I want to make is about what this underlying bill does to FDA. It cuts FDA, Federal Drug Administration, by 21%, about $580 million. On top of that, the FDA has to absorb another $37 million in higher rent costs. So we're really talking about a reduction to FDA of about $600 million, and yet we keep the law in place, so they have to continue all the current requirements and activities that are mandated to them. This kind of cut means that 2,000 fewer domestic and foreign inspections of firms that manufacture food and medical products can be made. This kind of cut means that more than 9,000 fewer FDA import inspections to verify that imported food and medical products meet safety standards. This kind of cut means there will be 4,000 fewer food and medical product samplings to identify safety problems. The amendment that I was going to introduce would have moved some funds from the Commissioner's Office to the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, or known as CDRH. The Center for Devices and Radiological Health is responsible for bringing new technologies to market and to make the medical devices that are already on the market safer and more effective. The FDA has implemented a more streamlined process by which medical devices can get to market called the innovation pathway. But with the cuts to the FDA budget in this bill, the innovation pathway will become innovation roadblock. At a hearing at the Energy and Commerce Committee, Subcommittee on Health on February 17, 2011, the director of CDRH, Dr. Jeffrey Suran, testified that these cuts, I quote, "The innovation pathway would be non-option, and for the rest of what we do, this would result in increased delays in decisions. It would deny patients truly safe and effective innovative technologies, and it will result in jobs being lost," unquote. So moving funds, even nominal funds, to CDHF makes a point that we would have to maintain a commitment to getting critical medical devices to market and to patients. The other point I want to make is the Center for Devices and Radiological Health is also responsible in part for the FDA advances in medical countermeasures. These medical countermeasures program extends across several FDA offices. The program coordinates the appropriate responses to national medical catastrophes. For CDHF means putting in place the right medical responses to radiological threats, threats like a dirty bomb, a rogue nuclear device, or even natural disasters like the one that occurred in Fukushima nuclear reactor after the earthquake and tsunami. This isn't just a health concern, it's a homeland security concern. Unless we are ready to handle these emergencies, many people could die or be permanently disabled. We have to prepare. The CDRHF can do that for us, but not with a budget cut like the one the FDA is facing. With 21% cut in FDA budget means the public health of America is put at risk. It is put on hold. Medical safety devices are put on hold. Medical countermeasures are put on hold. Radiological treatment improvements like the new forms of X-rays, PET scans, and MRAs are put on hold. I say it again, the 21% cut in FDA budget is not good for America's health. I wish that we didn't have to adopt a budget with that kind of a cut. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Anyone else seeking recognition? The gentleman no longer wishes to offer his amendment. The clerk will read.
Page 55, line 6. Buildings and Facilities, $8,788,000. Independent Agencies, Commodity Futures Trading Commission, $171,930,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2013. Farm Credit Administration, limitation on administrative expenses, $62 million. Title VII, General Provisions, including cancellations, rescissions, and transfers of funds. Section 701, Appropriations shall be available for purchase of passenger motor vehicles.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Brown of Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I rise to offer my amendment which would reduce the fleet of passenger vehicles that the USDA is able to purchase by half. Cutting the size of their fleet from 461 to 231 is a simple way to save our taxpayers some of their money, their hard-earned money. Mr. Chairman, I know many of my amendments cut programs that are near and dear to my colleagues and their district's hearts. We've heard very clearly from my friends on both sides regarding that. But together my amendments cut over $2 billion, and we accrue more than twice that amount of debt every single day. It's time to make the hard choices for greater good for our economy. We have to cut wherever we can, and cutting about 230 vehicles out of the USDA fleet is another way to save taxpayers money. I encourage people to vote for my amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I'm just curious, point of inquiry, Mr. Brown?
Gentleman from California.
Do you lease a car?
Do I lease a car?
Yeah.
No, sir, I do not.
You just drive your own private car?
I do indeed.
But
I buy a used one that costs
so do
less money than a new vehicle like this authorizes.
So you want to cut this account that is vehicles for the department?
230 vehicles, yes, sir.
And how do you expect them to get around?
Well, I've introduced a whole lot. Maybe they could ride share. That'd be a good way to save taxpayers' dollars also.
Well, I don't think we can operate government on a maybe, and I oppose this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Anyone else seeking recognition? Seeing no one, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed? In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not adopted too. The clerk will read.
Page 56, line 21. Section 702, the Secretary may transfer unobligated balances for the acquisition of plant and capital equipment. Section 703, no part shall remain available beyond the current fiscal year unless expressly so provided. Section 704, no funds may be used to pay indirect cost rates on cooperative agreements. Section 705, appropriations for the cost of direct and guaranteed loans shall remain available until expended. Section 706, none of the funds may be used to carry out Section 410 of the Federal Meat Inspection Act. Section 707, none of the funds may be used to acquire new information technology systems without the approval of the Chief Information Officer. Section 708, funds shall remain available to disburse obligations made in the current fiscal year. Section 709, any former RUS borrower that is eligible to receive an insured loan shall be eligible for assistance. Section 710, none of the funds may be used to prohibit the provision of an in-kind support from non-federal sources. Section 711, unobligated balances shall remain available through September 30th, 2013 for information technology expenses. Section 712, the Secretary may authorize a state agency to use funds provided to exceed the maximum amount specified when issuing liquid infant formula to participants. Section 713, none of the funds may be used for first-class travel. Section 714, each program established or amended by the Food Conservation and Energy Act of 2008, Public Law 110-246, using funds of the Commodity Credit Corporation shall be available for salaries and related administrative expenses. Section 715, in carrying out subsection H of Section 502 of the Housing Act of 1949, the Secretary may use the authority described in subsections H and J. Section 716, Clause II of Section 524B4B of the Federal Crop Insurance Act is amended. Section 717, appropriations to the Department made available in fiscal years 2005, 2006, and 2007 to carry out Section 601 of the Rural Electrification Act of 1936 shall remain available until expended. Section 718, none of the funds shall be used to carry out a program under subsection B2A IV of Section 1422 of Public Law 110-246 in excess of $948 million. Section 719, of the funds available, not more than $1,800,000 shall be used to cover necessary expenses related to all advisory committees. Section 720, none of the funds shall be available to pay indirect costs charged against any agricultural research or grant awards issued by the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Section 721, none of the funds may be used to write or publish a final rule in furtherance of the proposed rule. Section 722, the unobligated balances available for the Natural Resources Conservation Service forestry incentive programs, $5,500,000 are rescinded. Section 723 of the unobligated balances provided pursuant to Section 16H1A of the Food and Nutrition Act of 2008, $11 million is rescinded. Section 724, Section 1238EA of the Food Security Act of 1985 is amended. Section 725, Section 1240BA of the Food Security Act of 1985 is amended. Section 726, Section 1241A of the Food Security Act of 1985 is amended. Section 727, Section 1241A7D of the Food Security Act of 1985 is amended. Section 728, none of the funds shall be used to pay the salaries and expenses of personnel to carry out the Conservation Stewardship Program. Section 729, funds made available in Public Law 111-344 through February 12, 2012 for trade adjustment for farmers are hereby rescinded. Section 730, none of the funds shall be used to pay the salaries and expenses of personnel to carry out the Emergency Food Assistance Program if such program exceeds $200 million. Section 731, closure and conveyance of agricultural research service facilities. The Secretary may close up to 10 facilities of the Agricultural Research Service as proposed in the budget of the President. Section 732, Section 9 of the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act is amended. Section 733, unobligated balances available to the Department from prior appropriations. $63 million in appropriate discretionary funds are hereby rescinded. Section 734, none of the funds shall be made available to any non-Department of Agricultural employee questions or responses to questions that are a result of information requested for the appropriations hearing process. Section 735, none of the funds shall be available for obligation or expenditure through a reprogramming of funds. Section 736, none of the funds shall be used to pay the salaries and expenses of personnel who prepare appropriations language for programs under the jurisdiction of the subcommittees. Section 737, none of the funds may be used by an executive branch agency to produce any prepackaged news story intended for broadcast unless the story includes a clear notification that the story was prepared or funded by that executive branch agency. Section 738, no employee of the Department may be detailed from an agency to any other agency or office of the Department for more than 30 days unless the office is fully reimbursed by the receiving agency. Section 739, none of the funds may be used to pay the salaries or expenses of personnel to inspect horses.
For what purpose